It was supposed to be a joyful day for my son, his wedding day, but when he told me, "You're too ugly to attend, Dad," and refused to let me near the ceremony, my world fell apart. But what he didn't know, while he tried to erase me, I'd been planning something he never saw coming. The truth, my entire life's work wasn't his to steal, it was for those who really needed it. Now, my own family doesn't know what's coming. But I'm ready to take back what's mine, follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The phone buzzed against the small wooden table, its vibration rattling the ceramic coffee cup beside it. A familiar number lit up the screen, and without hesitation, I answered, expecting the warmth of my son's voice. Instead, what came through sliced sharper than any knife. "Dad, don't come to the wedding. You'll just embarrass me. You're too old, too ugly. People will stare." The words hung in the air, brutal and heavy, as if the walls themselves had recoiled. There was no pause, no attempt to soften the blow, just cold certainty before the line went dead. For a moment, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan seemed louder than the heartbeat pounding in my ears. The phone slipped slightly in my grip, and I sat frozen in the silence, staring at the blank screen. The evening heat of Houston pressed against the windows, but a chill ran straight through me. The son I had raised, the boy whose scraped knees I once bandaged, had cast me aside with a single sentence. I didn't even lower the phone right away. My hand stayed suspended, as though holding onto that last echo of his voice might change what I'd just heard. But nothing changed. The silence became heavier, swallowing me whole. Days later, a crisp white envelope appeared in the mailbox. Golden lettering shimmered faintly under the porch light as I slid a finger beneath the seal. A wedding invitation, official, proper, the kind families displayed on mantels. My chest tightened as I read the names printed in elegant script. My son's name, his fiancée's name, the date and the place. But where my name should have been, there was nothing more than Mr. Guest. I stood on the porch a long time, the evening sun settling low over the quiet neighborhood, the cicadas humming. The invitation trembled in my hand as bitterness crept up, slow and heavy. A father turned into a placeholder, stripped of identity, erased with the stroke of a careless pen. My thumb traced the embossed edges, but the smoothness only made the sting sharper. Inside the house, the paper rested on the kitchen table like a taunt. The golden ink caught the light, mocking the idea of celebration. A wedding was supposed to be joyous, a moment for family to gather, to laugh, to share stories. Instead, my place in that picture was blurred out. Memories rushed in unbidden, not in long reels, but sharp flashes, long nights spent driving trucks across Texas to keep food on the table. The look on my son's face when he first learned to ride a bike in our old neighborhood park, the nights I stayed up late, patching the roof during storms so he'd sleep safe and dry. Each sacrifice, each quiet effort, all leading to this invitation that reduced me to a stranger. The house was still, too still, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of old wood. My solitude pressed in like a second skin. In this modest home on the edge of Houston, the walls held my memories, but tonight they also held my silence. A knock on the fence jolted me. My neighbor, old Mr. Lewis, leaned over with his usual grin. "Big day coming up for your son, huh?" "Must be exciting to see him get married." I forced a nod, my throat tightening. "Yeah, exciting." The lie tasted bitter. Behind my half-smile, humiliation churned, shame mixed with anger, a storm I dared not reveal. To the world, I was just another proud father, but inside, I was a man stripped bare by his own blood. When Mr. Lewis wandered off, humming to himself, I stepped back inside. The invitation still lay on the table, its golden letters glinting. I stared at it until the edges blurred, then whispered to the empty room. So this is how it begins. Fingers tightening around the paper, I felt suspicion coil in my chest. If they could erase my name from a card, what else were they planning to erase? The neighbor's words kept echoing in my head as I stepped back inside my house. The silence of the place wrapped around me, heavier than usual. It wasn't just about the invitation anymore. It was about the eyes of the community, the unspoken questions that pressed against me from every side. When I walked out to check the mail that afternoon, Mrs. Jenkins from across the street waved. "Big day coming soon, isn't it?" she asked, her smile kind but curious. My lips pulled into something that must have looked like a smile, though inside it felt hollow. "Yeah," I said softly, clearing my throat. "Big day." Her eyes lingered a moment longer than I liked, as if she sensed the crack in my voice. I hurried back into the house, clutching the envelopes like a shield. The moment the door shut behind me, my shoulders slumped. Shame clung to me, sharp and suffocating. It wasn't just a private rejection anymore. Others knew. Others expected me to celebrate what I'd been cut out of. I set the letters down and leaned against the counter. My son's voice from the other night, cold, detached, echoed with a finality I couldn't shake. "You're too ugly to attend my wedding, Dad." Those words had burned me once. But now the embers smoldered beneath the weight of the community's gaze. Later that weekend, I went to pick up a loaf of bread at the small corner store. Houston heat clung to the air, pressing sweat against my back. As I approached the aisle, I froze. Near the register, two familiar voices carried, low but urgent, my son's and his fiancée's. "I just think it's better this way," she said, her tone hushed but firm. "After the wedding, we can move forward without complications." His reply came rough, impatient. I know, but he won't take it well. He's stubborn. We'll need to make it sound like it's for his own good. Getting him into a home will look like care, not exile." The words hit harder than any insult. A nursing home. They weren't just cutting me from the wedding. They were plotting to move me out of my life entirely. My legs wobbled, and I steadied myself against the shelf of canned beans, heart pounding. I ducked down the next aisle, gripping the cart as if it could hold me up. Their voices grew faint, but the meaning was carved deep. This wasn't just about shame. This was about erasure. Back home, the bread lay untouched on the counter. I sat at the kitchen table, the same invitation still resting there, its golden script now cruelly mocking me. Memories swirled, long nights at construction sites, calloused hands working double shifts to pay for his college, the sacrifices stacked higher than I could count. And now, this. The sting of betrayal pressed in. Was I nothing more than an obstacle to their future? My gaze lingered on the window, where the sun dipped low behind the neighbor's roof. Thoughts tangled inside me. Maybe it wasn't just that they were ashamed of me. Maybe they wanted to erase me entirely. And the bitterness thickened, but anger began to form. Subtle but steady. I whispered into the stillness, "If they want me invisible, then I'll watch closer than ever." The words hung in the air, half a vow, half a warning to myself. That night, when I stepped out to take the trash, I heard voices again, this time from the driveway next door. My son's fiancée was speaking quickly, her words clipped. "Once the house is signed over, he won't be a problem anymore." The sentence trailed off as she noticed someone passing by. I froze in the shadows, blood rushing in my ears. My heart hammered so loudly I thought they might hear it. Those words echoed through me like a storm I couldn't silence. The afternoon light spilled weakly through the blinds, painting pale stripes across the table. An email notification blinked on the screen. At first, it seemed harmless. Another message from one of those extended family lists my son's fiancée had started. But when I opened it, the air went still. Wedding photos, group shots full of beaming faces, scrolled down the screen, and there it was, my outline visible at the edge of one picture, but my face cropped out as if I were nothing but a smudge. The others smiled, framed perfectly, while my presence had been cut away like an accident best forgotten. The humiliation wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, precise, intentional. I leaned back in the chair, a dull ache spreading across my chest. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had taken the time to remove me, to erase me from a memory that should have belonged to me as much as to anyone else. The thought settled deep, bitter and cold. The sting of rejection wasn't just from words anymore. It had grown teeth, slicing away at my very existence. Hours later, another envelope landed in my mailbox. I slid my finger under the flap, already bracing for another cut. Inside lay the wedding program, crisp and expensive, with its glossy cover and elegant script. My eyes trailed down the page until they locked onto the words that made my breath hitch. Father of the groom, Richard Collins. Not my name, not me, but her husband, my ex-wife's new man. Anger pulsed through my veins hot and sharp. My hands shook, gripping the paper tighter than I should have. Years of raising a boy, sacrificing sleep and comfort. Every dollar saved for his schooling, all of it stripped away in a single line of print. I wasn't just being excluded. I had been replaced. My role stolen and handed to a man who hadn't been there when scraped knees needed tending or when homework piled up on the dining room table. That night, sleep refused to come. Lying in the dark, I replayed it all, the call that had shattered me, the invitation with my name reduced to nothing, the hushed talk of a nursing home, and now this program naming another man as father. The pieces fit together in a pattern I couldn't ignore. This wasn't embarrassment. This wasn't shame. It was erasure. They wanted me gone, not just from the wedding, but from the story of his life. The ceiling fan hummed overhead as my thoughts turned heavy. What did I mean to them anymore? If my own blood could replace me with a stranger, was I still a father in their eyes? Or just an inconvenient reminder of a past they didn't want to claim? Each question cut deeper, and yet with the pain came clarity. They weren't stumbling into cruelty. They were deliberate, and that knowledge sharpened the bitterness into something else, a fragile, flickering resolve. By the next evening, I found myself back at the table, staring down at the program like it was a verdict. My hands trembled, not from age, but from fury fighting to hold itself in check. The glossy paper felt heavy, as though it carried more than words. It carried judgment, dismissal, and betrayal, a whole history rewritten without me in it. I whispered into the silence, my voice rough, almost foreign. I wasn't just being left out, they were rewriting history, and I was being written out. The truth lay bare now, undeniable. My absence was no accident, it was a choice. The wedding program sat on my kitchen table, its glossy pages catching the fading light of evening. I had opened it 3 times already, each time hoping I had misread, each time confirming the same cruel omission. Names printed in elegant fonts lined the acknowledgments page. His mother, her new husband, even distant relatives who barely knew him. But not me, not the man who had raised him, fed him, sat up with him through fevers and heartbreaks. My fingers trembled as I traced the page, the weight of erasure pressing harder than the paper itself. Anger simmered low in my chest, sharp but steady. This wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. They wanted the world to see a wedding polished clean of me. The father of the groom cut out like an unseemly stain. For a moment, grief threatened to overwhelm, but I clenched my jaw and steadied my breath. If they thought I'd take this quietly, they didn't know me at all. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I dialed his number. Each ring stretched long, filling the silence of my modest Houston home. Finally, his voice came through, calm and detached. "Dad?" I swallowed the heat rising in my throat. "I got the program," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You care to explain why I'm nowhere in it?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "We didn't want to confuse people." "Confuse people?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "I'm your father." "What's confusing about that?" His tone chilled. "Look, it's not a big deal. Everyone knows who raised me, but it's better this way. Simpler. As though my life, my sacrifices were complications to be swept aside. A hollowness spread through me, and I gripped the phone tighter. "You erased me," I whispered, not sure if I was speaking to him or myself. "Dad, don't make this into something it's not. Just show up, sit down, and don't cause a scene. Please." The warning threaded through his words was clear. I pressed back against the tide of shame threatening to break. "And what if I do?" I asked quietly. Another pause. Then his voice, colder still. Then I'll have someone escort you out. The words hit harder than any slap. My own son. Speaking of me like an unruly guest who might spoil the party. My chest tightened. Humiliation burning into anger. I didn't trust myself to speak. So I ended the call. The click echoed in my quiet kitchen. For a long time, I sat staring at the program, the elegant fonts blurring through the heat in my eyes. Finally, I poured a glass of water and set it down hard enough to rattle the table. They thought they had silenced me, thought I would fade politely into the background. But inside, something shifted. A vow formed, silent but ironclad. If they believed I would walk away quietly, they had forgotten the man who built everything they were now standing on. The phone buzzed again, and I glanced down. A message from a cousin. Attached was a candid photo from the rehearsal dinner. Rows of neatly arranged chairs stretched out in the ballroom. My name wasn't on any of the cards near the front. My assigned seat was clear in the photo, pushed to the far back, near the swinging kitchen doors where servers would bustle in and out. Humiliation sharpened into something else, something harder. I stared at the photo until my vision steadied. They hadn't just erased me. They'd hidden me away, tucked out of sight like an embarrassment. That's when I knew this wasn't about shame anymore. This was war. The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds, casting thin stripes of light across the living room floor. The house felt quieter than usual, as if even the air held back in anticipation of what was coming. Sitting in my chair, the same chair I'd occupied for years, I let the stillness press against me. The weight of humiliation had stacked up like bricks. Each insult, each exclusion laid down by the very people I had once carried on my shoulders. But as the silence lingered, something inside shifted. Enough was enough. A legal pad rested on the table before me. My hand, still steady despite age, began jotting down the slights in an ordered list. The phone call that branded me an embarrassment. The invitation with Mr. Guest stamped like a scar across the envelope. The program that credited others, but not me. Each mark on the page was another reminder. This wasn't imagined pain. It was real, intentional, orchestrated. I wasn't documenting for pity. I was building clarity. A record of truth. My truth. By mid-morning, the cabin fever pushed me out of the house. A drive downtown felt necessary. Not to escape, but to breathe. The hum of Houston traffic surrounded me as I parked outside a cafe I hadn't visited in years. Inside, the familiar scent of roasted beans and faint jazz music softened my nerves. Gregory, an old friend from the refinery days, sat waiting at a corner table. His hair had gone grayer than mine, but his eyes still carried the same sharpness. "Been a while," he said, smiling warmly. I returned the smile, though mine carried weight. "Yeah, too long." We exchanged pleasantries until the conversation bent toward the truth I had carried like a secret wound. Slowly, I unfolded it, how my son had told me not to come to his wedding, how the invitation had stripped me of my own name, how whispers of a nursing home circled like vultures. Gregory listened, hands folded, face tightening with every word. "Good Lord," he muttered, shaking his head. "That's cruelty. Plain and simple. I can't believe he'd treat his own father that way." Hearing those words, spoken out loud by someone other than me, hit like cool water on a burn. For weeks, I'd wondered if I was exaggerating, if old age had clouded my judgment. But Gregory's outrage confirmed it. The wrong wasn't imagined. It was real. Back home that afternoon, the anger that had once left me trembling now gave way to fire in my chest. I reached for the phone, dialed my son's number, and waited as the line clicked alive. He answered flatly. "Dad?" My voice held calm steel. "We need to talk about that program." "About the way I've been treated." There was a pause. Then the casual cruelty slid through the speaker. "We didn't want to confuse people. Look, just sign the check, stay quiet, and let us handle this. It's easier for everyone." The silence that followed stretched long enough for him to know I hadn't hung up, long enough for him to hear the quiet fury I carried. Finally, I spoke, low and deliberate. "I won't be invisible at my own blood's wedding. You may think you've written me out, But I'm not done. He gave a short, dismissive laugh. We'll see about that. Then the line went dead. I set the phone down carefully, though every muscle in my arm wanted to slam it against the wall. Instead, I turned to the old cabinet in the corner, pulling out a battered folder. I sifted through the life I had built, receipts from a mortgage long ago paid in full, deeds with my name in clear ink, contracts signed in my hand. They thought I was weak, too old to remember, too weary to fight, but I remembered every nail I hammered, every dollar I sacrificed. At the kitchen table, I spread the documents before me like pieces on a chessboard. Quiet preparation replaced raw anger. If they wanted war, I would not enter it blind. Evening settled slowly. The house darkened until the only light came from the small lamp by the window. As I leaned back in the chair, the phone buzzed with a new message. It was from my cousin, one of the few relatives I still trusted. The words on the screen tightened my chest. You should know. There are papers being signed without your name. I read it twice, then a third time. My fingers clenched around the phone. The evidence I had been gathering wasn't just about dignity anymore. It was about survival, about legacy, about erasure in the most literal sense. Staring at the documents on the table, I whispered to the empty room. I warned him. Now it's clear they're not just trying to silence me, they're trying to erase me. The following morning, sunlight cut through the blinds of my modest living room as I gathered the folder I had kept hidden for years. My hands were steady, though my heart carried the weight of decades. That folder contained more than paper. It held proof of who I was in this family, proof they thought time had buried. Downtown Houston bustled with traffic and heat as I walked into my lawyer's office, a place I had avoided for years because I never thought I would need to defend myself against my own blood. He greeted me with his usual calm professionalism, though his eyes sharpened when I placed the folder on his desk. I've got something for you to see, I said, sliding it across. Inside were ownership deeds, bank records, even old contracts from when my late wife and I bought the house. His eyebrows rose higher with each page he turned. You've kept all this? He asked. Every last piece, I replied. They think I'm too old, too tired to fight, but I haven't forgotten what's mine. His voice was low but firm. This isn't just sentiment. Harold, legally, you have strong ground here. The way they're trying to edge you out, it won't hold up if we move quickly. Hearing that, a flicker of strength returned. The shame I had carried began to shift, replaced with something sharper. For once, I wasn't the one being cornered. We spent the next hour mapping out possibilities. He laid it out plainly. There were inheritance rights, property protections, and banking trails that clearly tied back to me. I listened carefully, trying not to let emotion cloud my judgment. It's not going to be easy, he warned. They'll try to drag you through the mud, and it's going to take a toll. But if you stand your ground, you've got the law on your side. For the first time in weeks, I felt like silence could be an asset rather than a weakness. Let them underestimate me. Every quiet moment had been building toward this. When I left his office, the folder tucked under my arm again. The city seemed different. The sting of betrayal hadn't lessened. But now it mixed with something steadier. Resolve, back at home. I cleared a space at my old desk. Dust rose as I opened boxes that hadn't been touched since my wife passed. Inside were faded receipts, family photographs, even yellowed envelopes. I sifted through them with patience, knowing every slip of paper was a piece of the truth. Then I found it, an overlooked document I barely remembered signing. My late wife's signature was there beside mine on a joint deed, one that secured my claim beyond any shadow they could cast. My chest tightened, not from sorrow this time, but from the sudden shift in power. They thought I had nothing left. They were wrong. I sat there for a long while, staring at her handwriting, remembering the promises we made when we built this life together. The bitterness of what our son had become cut deep. But beneath that, a steel thread of determination wove itself tighter. This wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, and I would not let them erase me. That evening, as the house settled into its familiar silence. The phone rang. My lawyer's voice came through. Urgent. Harold, we may need to act faster than we thought. I've just learned your son's side is moving to file documents tomorrow. I gripped the receiver, my jaw tightening. Then we won't wait. If they want a war, they'll get one. When I hung up, I sat in the quiet darkness, the weight of years on my shoulders. But this time, it wasn't the weight of defeat. It was the weight of armor. The war had officially begun, and I wasn't going to lose. The morning light barely crept through the blinds when the knock came. Not a neighbor's polite tap, but the firm thud of an official hand. An envelope slid under the door, its weight heavier than paper should allow. Picking it up, the first words burned my eyes. Notice of alleged financial misconduct. The letter accused me of misusing funds, fabrications dressed in legal language, as if I had siphoned off my own family's money. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I read, every line dripping with lies. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was public, stamped and notarized, meant to strip me of whatever dignity I had left. Anger roared behind my ribs, hot and wild, but beneath it was something colder, resolve forming like stone. Later that day, I walked to the community center, a place where laughter once greeted me and old friends saved me a seat. Today, the air shifted the moment I stepped in. Heads turned. Whispers carried. Eyes darted away as if guilt could be contagious. Conversations stilled when I passed, then picked up again in hushed tones. The weight of rumor pressed down harder than the envelope in my pocket. My own son's voice, twisting the truth, had spread faster than any wildfire. I forced a smile, tried to meet a neighbor's eye. She offered only a thin, nervous nod before turning away. Shame rose hot in my face, not because I believed their lies, but because my family had painted me into this corner. A man stripped of trust in public is a man left naked. I sought out a few familiar faces, men who had known me for decades, who had shaken my hand at church picnics and trusted me with their children's safety. I told them pieces of the story, careful, measured. Their faces shifted, caught between loyalty and fear. One finally spoke, eyes darting toward the door. Maybe it's better if you just settle quietly. Don't make it worse for yourself. The words cut deeper than the accusations. Settle quietly, as if silence was the only dignity left to me. Betrayal wasn't always loud. Sometimes it came in whispers from those who once stood beside you. Loneliness settled in my chest, heavier than any grief I'd known. But somewhere inside, the sting began to harden into something sharper. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The false accusations spread before me. The silence of my home pressed close, but it no longer felt like surrender. They could paint me as unstable, unfit, even crooked. But I knew the truth. Silence would not be weakness. It would be the armor I wore until the right moment to strike. The phone shattered the quiet near midnight. My lawyer's voice came through, low but urgent. We've uncovered new evidence. They're not just trying to take your money. They're moving to have you declared unfit to make your own decisions. The words echoed, chilling and final. Declared unfit, erased not just from the weddings, not just from memory, but from my own life. I set the phone down slowly, the blood pounding in my ears. If they thought they could bury me that easily, they had no idea who they were up against. The late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds as I pulled into my son's driveway. Cars already lined the curb. Relatives packed inside his house for what they called a serious discussion. My hands gripped the steering wheel longer than necessary. The air was heavy before I even stepped through the door. Inside, the room felt like a courtroom. My son and his wife sat at the far end, shoulders squared, expressions stern. Family members filled the chairs and couches, their eyes trained on me the moment I walked in. No one offered a smile. No one stood to greet me. I might as well have been a defendant about to stand trial. "Dad," my son began, voice clipped and formal. "We're here because there are concerns." His wife leaned in, sliding a folder onto the coffee table with deliberate precision. We can't ignore what's been happening. It's time we face this openly. I lowered myself into a chair, slow and steady, refusing to let them see my hands shake. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. I met their eyes one by one, waiting for the accusations to fall. My son opened the folder and pushed it forward. You've become reckless and unfit. These documents show you've mishandled property and funds. We can't let this continue. His tone carried the weight of judgment, like he was protecting everyone from me. I didn't reach for the papers. Instead, I leaned back and let him continue. Page after page was slid across the table. Receipts, signatures, statements, all dressed up to look legitimate. A few relatives murmured in disbelief, their gazes shifting uncomfortably. My daughter-in-law folded her arms, confident, almost smug. My heart pounded, but my face remained calm. "Are you finished?" I asked, voice low and steady. He nodded, leaning back with the air of a man certain he'd just won. I reached for my own folder, the one I'd brought tucked under my arm. "Interesting," I said, opening it carefully, "because what you've just shown is forged." The room stirred. I pulled out the original deed, complete with my late wife's unmistakable signature. The ink faded but undeniable. I placed it next to their counterfeit, the differences plain even to the untrained eye. Gasps filled the room as relatives leaned forward. Before anyone could speak, I pulled my phone from my pocket. "And this," I said, pressing play on a recorded call. My son's voice spilled into the room, clear and cold. "We'll get him to sign it over. He won't fight back. He never does." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. My niece stepped out from the corner, voice trembling but strong. "I heard them too," she admitted. "Uncle's telling the truth." The murmurs rose into sharp whispers. My daughter-in-law tried to cut in, but others shushed her. Unwilling to dismiss what was now undeniable, for the first time in weeks, the balance shifted. Faces that once looked at me with doubt now softened, some even showing shame. My son's jaw clenched, his composure unraveling. He slammed a hand against the table. "If you don't sign everything over," he barked, "we'll drag you through court until you have nothing left." The words hung in the air like a blade. I leaned forward, folding my hands calmly on the table. My voice was quiet, but each word landed heavy. "If war is what you want," I said, locking eyes with him, "then war is what you'll get." The room gasped as if the walls themselves had shuddered. For once, the fear wasn't mine. The morning light crept in through the blinds, but it did little to warm the weight pressing down on my chest. The house was silent, too silent, and yet my phone buzzed with a cruel kind of life. Dozens of messages stacked up, some relatives offering words of pity, others firing daggers disguised as advice. "Maybe you should let them handle things." The split was clear. Half thought me a burden, the other half quietly rooting for me. Scrolling through those words, exhaustion seeped into every bone, but tucked between the accusations was one message from a niece I hadn't spoken to in months. "We know the truth, not everyone's blind." That single line glowed like a fragile flame, enough to remind me that lies never hold forever. I needed air. Houston mornings in late summer carried a mix of heat and restless breeze, and as I stepped into the cafe down the block, the room shifted. Conversations dulled. A few eyes lingered on me, whispering in corners. My coffee felt heavier than it should. But then came a voice cutting through the fog. Old Mr. Ramirez, my neighbor for 3 decades, leaned on his cane and said aloud, "That man raised his boy with everything he had. Don't you forget that." The room froze. Heads turned. Some faces softened. Others looked away. My throat tightened, not with shame this time, but with gratitude. That small defense cracked the wall of lies my son had built. I nodded toward Ramirez, no words able to rise. But inside something shifted. Later that afternoon, there was a knock. My cousin Daniel stood on the porch, hands stuffed in his pockets, eyes darting like a boy caught stealing. He sat across from me, silence stretching until it snapped. "Oh, they promised me a share," he confessed, voice low. "If I stayed quiet about the papers, about the way they were planning it." His words trailed off. The sting wasn't in his betrayal, it was in how casually he admitted it, as if my dignity was just another bargaining chip. I looked him in the eye, steady but worn. "You'll have to decide, Daniel. Family isn't built on scraps tossed to the highest bidder." He couldn't hold my gaze, and when he left, I knew the circle around me had grown smaller, but clearer. By evening, the house no longer felt like a tomb. Instead, it felt like a fortress. Decades of sacrifice, every bill paid, every meal cooked, every night spent working overtime, rose in me like armor. They could spread lies. They could try to erase me, but they couldn't erase the truth I carried. The phone rang as the sun dipped low. It was my lawyer, his tone clipped and urgent. "It's worse than we thought," he said. "They've filed papers to declare you mentally incompetent. If it goes through, you lose everything, your house, your accounts, even your say in your own life." I held the receiver tight, breath heavy but steady. The betrayal had reached its peak, yet beneath the sting, a fire roared awake. If they wanted to bury me alive, they'd soon learn this old man still knew how to fight back. The courthouse loomed before me, its wide steps stretching upward like a final test of strength. Each step carried the weight of humiliation I had endured, but also the years of sacrifices no one seemed to remember. My legs felt heavier than usual, yet I straightened my back, refusing to shuffle like a beaten man. The marble doors opened, and a chill swept through me. Not from the air conditioning, but from the knowledge that my own flesh and blood was waiting inside to strip away what dignity I had left. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was thick with whispers and sidelong glances. My son sat flanked by his fiancée and a lawyer in a sharp suit. Their eyes barely acknowledged me as I took my seat beside my own attorney, Linda Green, who had stood by families like mine for decades. She gave me a small nod, reminding me I wasn't walking into this alone. Still, it stung to realize that the battle I was fighting wasn't against strangers, it was against my son. The judge entered, commanding silence. The gavel struck, and the assault began. My son's lawyer rose with a stack of papers, his voice dripping with practiced concern. "Your Honor, we present documentation that Mr. Finch is no longer capable of managing his own affairs. Signs of cognitive decline, questionable financial decisions, and instability have raised serious concerns about his competence." The words rang out like arrows. From behind me, I could hear faint gasps and whispers ripple through the gallery. Some neighbors had come, curious about the scandal. To them, I was suddenly a question mark, a frail old man whose mind was being put on trial. My jaw tightened, but I sat still, my hands folded, refusing to give them the spectacle of an outburst. Linda stood calmly when her turn came, her voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, we will show that these accusations are not only unfounded but malicious. We submit medical evaluations from licensed physicians confirming that Mr. Finch is of sound mind, capable of managing his property and affairs without interference." The judge adjusted his glasses as the first piece of evidence was presented. A doctor, gray-haired but firm, stepped forward. His testimony sliced through the lies with precision. "I evaluated Mr. Finch personally. His cognitive scores are well within normal range. He is alert, oriented, and capable of making independent decisions." For a moment, the room shifted. My son shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his gaze fixed on the floor. His fiancée whispered something in his ear, but he refused to look up. It was as if the mirror of truth had been held too close, and he couldn't bear the reflection. The momentum grew stronger. Linda pressed on, pulling out old receipts, ownership documents, and my wife's signed deed. Every word painted a picture not of incompetence, but of a man who had carefully built and preserved what his family now wanted to steal. Then, something unexpected happened. A voice rose from the gallery. It was Mr. Thompson, an elder from the community center, his weathered hands gripping the bench. "Your Honor," he said, his voice trembling but resolute. "This man has guided families like ours for decades. He has counseled neighbors, helped widows, and kept our traditions alive. To call him incompetent is not just false, it's an insult to the truth." The courtroom fell silent for a moment. Even the judge paused, acknowledging the courage it took for an outsider to speak. A warmth spread in my chest, fragile but real. I wasn't as alone as they wanted me to believe. The judge cleared his throat. "I will review the evidence overnight before making a ruling. Court is adjourned until tomorrow." The gavel struck again, echoing like a clock ticking down to judgment. As I gathered my papers, my son leaned close. His voice a hiss meant only for me. "This isn't over. You'll regret pushing me." His eyes burned with bitterness, but there was a flicker of something else, fear. I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "The only regret will be yours." My voice was low, but it carried the weight of decades he could never erase. Walking out of the courthouse, the sun felt harsher than before, the heat clinging to my skin. Yet beneath the sweat and exhaustion, there was a steel in me that no courtroom or betrayal could melt away. The outcome was uncertain, but the fight was far from finished. The courthouse was hushed when I walked in, though the air felt heavy with judgment. I settled into my seat, the polished wood creaking under my weight. Across the aisle, my son avoided my gaze, staring at the floor as if it might offer him some escape. His wife leaned close to him, whispering something sharp, her eyes darting toward me like daggers. My heart beat steadily, but my hands betrayed me. Trembling against my knees, I folded them together, willing the shaking to stop. I had weathered storms before, but this one carried a weight no father should bear. The judge entered, robes sweeping as the room stood in unison. We sat again, the silence so complete I could hear my own breath. I told myself to hold firm, that whatever came next would not take my dignity from me. The judge's voice cut through the stillness. After reviewing the evidence presented, and considering the testimonies given, he paused, shuffling papers that determined more than just property. They defined my worth in the eyes of my own family. Then came the words I hadn't dared hope for but needed with every fiber of my being. "This court finds the respondent fully competent. All claims against him are dismissed." Gasps rippled across the gallery. My son slumped back into his chair, his shoulders collapsing under the weight of defeat. His wife leaned in, her face twisted in anger, whispering through clenched teeth. Their plan, so carefully crafted, had crumbled before their eyes. A rush of relief filled my chest, so powerful it made me dizzy. I had been vindicated, not just legally, but as a man who still had the right to stand tall. Relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some approached me as the judge left, their words low and apologetic. "We didn't know the whole story," one cousin murmured. Another pressed my hand briefly, guilt in their eyes, but others stormed out, their silence louder than any apology could be. Watching their retreating backs, I felt no triumph, only the weight of what this battle had cost. Victory, when measured against one's own blood, never tastes sweet. That evening, my home welcomed me with quiet. The clatter of a pot, the hiss of water boiling on the stove, small sounds that soothed where words had cut deep. I sat at my kitchen table with a simple meal, the silence wrapping around me like an old friend. For the first time in weeks, the food settled in my stomach without bitterness. I told myself forgiveness might never come, but clarity had, and sometimes clarity was enough. The phone rang as the night deepened. A calm voice introduced herself as a mediator, offering counseling for families fractured by disputes like mine. "There may still be a path forward," she said gently, "if both sides are willing." I thanked her, though I couldn't commit to anything. Hanging up, I sat in the glow of the kitchen light, staring at the phone as if it might reveal the future. My whisper carried through the still room. Maybe wounds can't heal fully, but they don't have to stay open forever. I rose and walked to the window. Beyond the glass, the neighborhood lay quiet under the soft glow of street lamps. For the first time in a long while, the world outside seemed calm. Yet inside, A question lingered. As I looked out into the night, I wondered if peace was finally within reach, or just another illusion. The house greeted me with silence when I stepped back inside, the kind that lingers in corners and presses against the chest. The trial was over, the verdict delivered, but the echoes of it still followed me. I set my jacket over the chair and paused, letting the weight of the years settle over me. Every late-night shift, every dollar saved, every sacrifice made for my son, all of it now seemed like a story that belonged to someone else. He had chosen wealth and appearances over blood, and in that choice, I saw the truth I had avoided for too long. Sitting in my kitchen, I traced the wood grain of the table I built decades ago. Love, I realized, that was never about control or recognition. I had given freely, but what they wanted now wasn't love, it was ownership. That silence around me, though heavy, felt almost cleansing. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for the next blow. What my son didn't know, and what I had never told anyone, was that the property and savings he schemed over were no longer his to covet. Long before this fight began, I had transferred my assets into a community trust. Scholarships for children who grew up the way I did. Support funds for families who had lost their footing. That was where my life's work had gone. Betrayal had only hardened my resolve. If my children couldn't honor the sacrifices I made, then I would make sure strangers, deserving and hungry for opportunity, would carry forward what I had built. The thought of his face when he discovered this made me lean back in my chair with a weary smile. Power, it turned out, wasn't in holding on to property. It was in choosing where it would go. Later that evening, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter. Not to my son or his wife. They had made their choices. This was for the grandchildren. Still young, still with time to learn. I wrote of dignity, of how greed corrodes the heart, of how family without respect isn't family at all. I told them betrayal can scar, but it doesn't have to define who we become. I urged them to choose compassion when the world tempts them with shortcuts. My handwriting trembled, but my words carried the steadiness I felt inside. Folding the letter, I sealed it in an envelope marked with their names. Maybe they would never read it. Maybe it would gather dust, but maybe, one day, it would guide them where their parents had lost their way. When the night fell, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool, the kind that softens the edges of a long day. I rocked gently in the old wooden chair and listened to the cicadas. Peace washed over me, not because I had won in court, but because I had chosen my ending. Justice wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about making sure love outlived hate. The story of my life would not be about what was taken from me, but about what I chose to leave behind. Betrayal had wounded me deeply, but it had not broken me. My dignity, my will, my choice to give, that was mine alone. In the end, I may have lost my children's love, but I gained something greater, the power to choose who I became, even in the twilight of my life.